This video was originally presented at the American Nystagmus Network's 2017 conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Speaking is Joe Ambrico, the Research Liaison and Vice President of ANN. This narration was added after the conference and represents the comments I made during the original presentation. Nystagmus is an active area of medical research by many people at universities and institutions around the world. This video is a snapshot of those researchers and is by no means a comprehensive list of those performing nystagmus research. It is meant to give a brief view of the research being conducted and the people performing it. The tour begins from our current location in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We actually do not have to go very far to find our first researcher. Right here in Minneapolis, at the University of Minnesota, we find Dr. Linda McClune, a professor in the Department of Ophthalmology. Dr. McClune was present at the conference and made a full presentation on how nystagmus affects the eye muscles themselves and how the differences in the eye muscles may lead to new treatment options. Her full presentation can be found in a separate conference video. Continuing on our journey, we head west to Seattle, Washington. There, at the University of Washington, we find Dr. James Phillips and Dr. Avery Weiss. Both Dr. Phillips and Dr. Weiss were present at the conference and each made full presentations on nystagmus research. Like Dr. McClune, their full presentations can be found in separate conference videos. We now make a left turn and head south down the west coast of the U.S. to Southern California and land at the University of California at Irvine. There, we find Dr. Robert Lingua. If you have followed online social media, you are already very familiar with Dr. Lingua. If not, let me provide some context so that you might more fully appreciate his remarks, since his work has been rather controversial. Back in 2002, a surgeon named Sinski developed a new surgical procedure to treat nystagmus. In his procedure, he would partially cut the 4 horizontal eye muscles and not reattach them. This limited the ability of the muscles to move the eyes and thus damped the shaking of the eyes from the nystagmus. It is a very aggressive procedure and had several side effects. Particularly, there is the loss in the range of motion of the eyes, the development of strabismus, or misalignment of the eyes, even when the eyes were straight beforehand, and the possibility of post-op intraocular bleeding from the eye muscles that were cut and not reattached. Because of these downsides, the surgical procedure was not very popular. Fast forward to 2014, where Dr. Lingua, a surgeon at UC Irvine, developed a modification to the original Sinski procedure to try to address some of these complications. His modifications are aimed at the mechanics of the surgery itself and are not too important to understand for our purposes. The general idea of the surgery is still the same, to partially cut and not reattach the eye muscles. He published a paper in 2016 comparing case results from 39 patients having either the original Sinski procedure or his modified procedure. He was able to show that the modified procedure reduced the risk of the complications of the original Sinski procedure. Lingua thus suggested that his modified procedure is the best primary procedure to treat nystagmus above any other type of surgery. He then began to develop a loyal, passionate following by some of the members of the ANN community. However, several of his peers in the nystagmus research field had significant concerns with this surgery, since it is still a very aggressive procedure. Although the modifications developed by Dr. Lingua lowered the risks of the complications of the original procedure, it did not by any means eliminate them. Particularly troubling to other researchers is the fact that the modified procedure still resulted in some loss of the ability to move the eyes in most patients. Additionally, the other researchers were critical that Lingua's study had too many varying parameters and that the analysis of the patient's vision post-op was not extensive enough, which, to be fair, Lingua did acknowledge in his paper. Given these concerns, the researchers did not agree that there was enough evidence that Lingua's modified surgery should be the primary surgery for nystagmus, as Lingua suggested. They also objected that Lingua began, in their minds, to perform this procedure liberally. So they filed a formal complaint with UC Irvine's Internal Review Board expressing their concerns. The review board investigated the complaint and in the end agreed with the other researchers. They ruled that more study was needed to show the procedure is safe and barred Lingua from performing this procedure and even speaking and promoting it until a more extensive study was conducted. At the same time, the researchers critical of the procedure took to social media to voice their concerns to the ANN community who might be considering the Lingua procedure. Unfortunately, some used rather strong and inflammatory language to make their point. The conversation quickly devolved into a flame war. I want to emphasize here that the official position of the American Nystagmus Network is that we are a treatment-agnostic organization, meaning that we do not promote one particular treatment over another. Rather, we try to educate our members on the pros and cons of each treatment so that they are better equipped to make an informed decision about treating their particular situation. I had originally reached out to Dr. Lingua several months before the conference to see if he would contribute in some way. At that time, he was prevented from doing so by his university's internal review board's decision. However, the weekend before the conference, he contacted me and informed me that he was granted approval from the review board to provide a short video for the ANN conference. So now, let us hear directly from Dr. Lingua.
Dear members of the American Nystagmus Network, this video represents the information delivered last fall during the American Academy of Ophthalmology annual meeting. I have no financial interest to disclose for this presentation. What I hope to do is to recruit your support for continued study into more aggressive surgery for the treatment of nystagmus. I also hope to dispel the rumor that patients after myectomy cannot move their eyes. Although this work is not yet complete, we have no chance of recruiting other surgeons to carry on this work unless a more open-minded and welcoming climate exists in the research community. This, I think, is a key role ANN can play. This young lady presented to us after traditional nystagmus surgery with, as you can see, a significant residual nystagmus. Is this really the best we can do? Should she have to look this way the rest of her life? I don't think so. I think we should do more, we must do more. So how is it that we came to offer her the myectomy procedure? Where did this all begin? We will return to her in a moment. In 2002, Dr. Robert Sinski first described muscle removal to control the nystagmus seen on the left. This patient was followed by him, and you can see in 2 years his eyes were quiet, but more importantly, even at the 10-year mark, the nystagmus had not yet returned. This was a very aggressive procedure, and my research focuses on modifying this concept to one which is less invasive, called myectomy without reattachment. So please understand that we're not performing the original Sinski extirpation procedure, but rather a modification consisting of a measured amount of removal to prevent reattachment to the globe to reduce the nystagmus, but to allow attachment to the intermuscular fascia that allows ocular rotation. So let us return now to our teen who is post-op traditional surgery. And if you look to the right, you can see her now 16 months after successful myectomy. I think you'll agree the reduction in nystagmus amplitude is dramatic. Her ocular rotations are fairly intact, although in patients who have already had surgery before, there can be modest limitations of movement, as can be seen after many types of eye muscle surgery, not just myectomy. This second patient again has residual nystagmus and a left exotropia after traditional tenotomy surgery. So we had to address both the strabismus and the nystagmus. I also show her because, as you'll see in side gaze, the nystagmus persists, and so we should try to do something about that as well. Let's now look to the right and see her 5 months post-op, well, you'll see the strabismus corrected and the nystagmus amplitude virtually non-existent. What's interesting is she not only has good eye rotations, but the nystagmus into side gaze has improved as well. One final case of a young teen with a persistent nystagmus, despite medical therapy, had not been operated previously, and we asked whether myectomy might be suitable as a primary procedure. So pre-op to the left, and now on the right is a home video. Demonstrating her improved ocular position, rotation, and quieting of the nystagmus. The myectomy work is not yet complete. These 3 patients are part of a 24-patient cohort to be examined retrospectively, where we seek to ask, how much myectomy is optimal? Can we enhance existing procedures to simulate myectomy? What is the optimal age for acuity gain? How can we best prevent or manage existing strabismus? And how great can the acuity gain be in the presence of foveal hypoplasia with or without albinism? I hope the members of the American Nystagmus Network will fight to support the community of eye surgeons interested in nystagmus to undertake this and other work, and insist that the dialogue be truthful, objective, and thereby protect them from personal attack, which is far outside the realm of professionalism and judicious thought. Let's keep the work open, honest, and unrelenting to conquer nystagmus. Thank you.
So now, let us hop back on our magic carpet and continue our one lap around the world and head west across the Pacific Ocean all the way to Melbourne, Australia. There, let us hear from Professor Larry Abel from the University of Melbourne.
Hi, greetings from chilly Melbourne, Australia. It is winter down here. I'm Larry Abel, and I was asked if I would like to record a video talking about what we've been doing more recently about nystagmus research. And I thought I would start by reviewing what I've done in the past. Sorry if this is a little disjointed, but I'm recording myself off my laptop in my home office, and occasionally I'm looking over at my notes to see what I wanted to say. I started studying nystagmus about 40 years ago with Lou Deloso when I was a postdoc down in much warmer Miami, Florida. And since I've been an independent academic many years now, nystagmus has been one of the main things I've been interested in. And I think a common theme of a lot of my work over about the last 15, 20 years has been to try and extend what we know about infantile nystagmus beyond what you see in the clinic, or even just looking at the squiggles of an eye movement recording and trying to see, can we understand how it behaves, not in the clinic, but in the wild, in people's daily lives, so that we can better understand how treatments affect not just the presentation to us as researchers or clinicians, but how it affects your experience of your nystagmus. About 15 years ago, my PhD student Linda Tukalchevich and I wanted to investigate the widely stated comment that nystagmus gets worse with effort to see. So we asked people to read smaller and smaller targets on a computer monitor and found that it didn't affect their nystagmus at all. So this was a bit of a surprise. Turns out no one had actually looked at this before. When we debrief people, they said, well, it does usually get worse when they try to see, but when they try to see something they care about. And they really didn't care about the targets on our monitor. So the next experiments were with my then PhD student, now colleague at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Kwang Chom, and we thought, well, maybe motivation will help. And in Australia, like in America, one of the common motivators is money. So we offered people the chance to recognize targets on a screen. They got a little money if they got it right, and we told them they would lose even more if they got it wrong. And we did find that both motivation as well as mental load, and by mental load, I'm referring to doing something cognitively demanding, in this case, mental arithmetic. Most people hate arithmetic, and when you ask them to do it in their heads, they like it even less. And we found that both this and motivation caused a deterioration in the nystagmus waveform. And when we looked at foveation, the amount of time that the image of what you're looking at is on the fovea, the high resolution bit of the retina, and stationary or almost stationary, we found that this deteriorated when they were under mental load. Okay, so in that bar graph, what we're looking at there is how long the foveation periods, the little high resolution bits of your waveform, were present at baseline, which is looking at a dot, and as people had to do mental arithmetic while identifying letters on a screen as they got smaller, and if they got it wrong, Kwong would badger them about it. So that makes him a very effective teacher now in our course. Okay, well, we couldn't really assess vision properly then, but we decided to have another go at that. We're still limited by the computer displays, and my most recent PhD student, Marzia Salehi Fadardi, who just recently finished PhD on nystagmus, we decided to extend this by using targets that got smaller and lower contrast to make them even harder to see. And our study was done with people always looking straight ahead, and that's pretty common in the literature. Other groups have had people just looking at their null position. Many of you have a null position and probably use it all the time. So what we wanted to do was look at nystagmus at the null and some known distance away from it. So we again had people doing mental arithmetic sometimes, not doing mental arithmetic sometimes, identifying targets on the screen that were either easy to see or hard to see. And we did this with or without mental load. So we had two sort of extremes. High visual demand, which is teeny weeny faint targets. Teeny weeny is a technical term, of course. And big, easy to see black and white targets. And then mental load was either, I think, counting back from 100 by 13s or just looking at the targets. And we recorded not only eye movements, we also recorded skin conductance, sort of like a lie detector, and we recorded heart rate, and we recorded pupil size, because we're now using a video-based eye tracker. And all of these respond as part of the response to stress, the fight or flight mechanism. So we would expect when stressed, people's pupils would get bigger, their palms would get sweaty, and their heart rate would go up and become more variable. And so we assessed all of these as well as asking people, did they find the task stressful? And we used a NASA questionnaire to do that. And this may seem a bit artificial. How does this relate to real life? But think about, say, you're driving along. It's a foggy day. You're on an unfamiliar highway. You're late for an important meeting. You're thinking about what you're going to say at the meeting, and you're trying to read the road sign through the fog up ahead. So I don't think these conditions are all that unrealistic. Okay, so what you saw in those pictures was that mental load did accelerate heart rate, and you did get pupil increase in diameter at the high mental load. Okay, so then the question is, what happens to the nystagmus? And again, we looked at foveation duration, those periods where your eyes are most still and able to resolve the target the best, as well as looking at frequency. And we looked at this at baseline, which was again a dot on a screen, which requires no effort. You just look at the dot. Then we did it with low and high visual demand, big black targets, little faint targets, and at the null and 15 degrees away from the null, which is usually far enough that people's waveforms will degrade. So that may sound like a horrible thing to analyze. It was. Marcia actually had to find statisticians overseas who helped her with it. They're actually authors on the paper, and we thank them. But we did find the following. We've seen a really complicated design here, but if you look at the graphs for high visual demand, low visual demand, and low mental load, high mental load, you can come to the conclusion that foveation changed more from baseline under conditions of mental load at the null than it did away from the null. That is, the waveform at the null position was more vulnerable to change than away from the null. And that's probably because it was better. And those of you who are really paying attention to the graph may notice, high visual demand, though, foveation seems better under a low mental load at least. And this seems paradoxical, but this was actually observed by Debbie Wiggins in Cardiff some years ago. So there actually is precedent for that. So we've now found a rather complex relationship between mental load, distance from the null, and visual demand. We still haven't really looked at visual acuity, though. Okay, so this brings us up to date in my lab, but I have a new PhD student who is a Chinese ophthalmologist, Bing Dai, who's had a long-standing interest in nystagmus and albinism, having done some research on albinism back in China. And so we're planning to try and take this further into the real world now. What we want to do is, again, recruit people with infantile nystagmus. And after characterizing the nystagmus, looking at just baseline targets, dots on a screen, we also want them to do something a bit more realistic, a visual search task, where they have to find a specific target on a screen that's mixed in with targets that resemble it in some ways but not others, so that they really have to scrutinize the scene. And we want to see how this is affected when the targets are at their null or when they're away from their null. And again, they're going to get to do a mental arithmetic. And searching for something that's hard to find, I don't think I have to tell you, is a fairly realistic thing to do. We all do this. And so if we're also under mental stress, will this become harder? And will it become harder for those of you with nystagmus if the target isn't lying in your null position? The other thing we're hoping to do, and oddly enough, this really has not been looked at, is looking to see how identifying a moving object is affected by the changes in waveform. We know that when someone pursues a target that people with nystagmus can pursue, and their pursuit may affect where their null is. So what we want to do is see how well individuals can resolve moving targets as they're at different positions with respect to their now moving null, and does this affect their apparent visual acuity? And I guess the example that comes to mind for this is you're on the street, you see the tram, I live in Melbourne, or the bus if you don't have trams, and you're trying to read the sign to see if it's the tram you want. Should you run for it? The tram is moving. You're looking off away from your null. And how much does where the tram is as it moves affect your ability to read the destination sign? We also, if we can get another eye tracker, may try and actually take nystagmus literally out of lab into the real world and give people real world things to find. But that's something I hope I can tell you about in the future. So I hope these videos make some sense, and enjoy your conference. Thank you.
Continuing on our journey, we head west, all the way to Europe, and land in Nijmegen, in the Netherlands. Dr. Bianca Hoorneman from the Donders Institute for the Brain, Cognition, and Behavior provided a video on her recent work. She has shown that moderate amounts of computerized perceptual learning can lead to noticeable improvements in not only near and distance visual acuity, but also in reading performance and depth perception in 6 to 11-year-old children with infantile nystagmus. Dr. Hoorneman opted to exclude the video shown at the conference from this online video. From the Netherlands, we now make a short hop over to the UK and land at the University of Southampton.
Welcome from Southampton. We have a big nystagmus research group led by J-Self and Helena Lee. We are really lucky that our research group is run by clinical doctors who also run research groups. And it's located on a site where we have a big children's hospital and a very big eye department. Research also goes on under the same roof. All our research aims to answer the common questions patients ask us every day. For example,
why has my child got nystagmus?
To help answer this question, we are working on earlier diagnosis through genetic testing and developing clinical tests for eye doctors around the world to use. Does this just affect their eyes, or could this affect anything else in their body?
Again, we're hoping to answer this question by working on very early diagnosis to pick up signs of other problems in other parts of the body, and also working on the genetic diagnosis to help exclude other conditions. How will this affect them later on? Will they live a normal life?
Again, this depends on the exact cause of the nystagmus, but potentially this can affect every aspect of life, including school, work, and social life. We are currently working on a tool to assess this in much more detail. What can you do to treat this?
One thing we're doing is reassessing some treatments which have been advocated in the past, but doing this in very specific forms of nystagmus according to diagnosis. The second thing we have is 2 new projects looking at specific treatments for specific subtypes of nystagmus, and these are being evaluated prior to going into clinical trials. Who else will get this in the family? What if I have another child?
Again, this highlights the importance of an early and accurate diagnosis of the nystagmus. A number of projects already aim to achieve this. Only then can we answer this question for families.
To summarise our research in Southampton, we have a keen focus on diagnosis and treatment. To this end, we are currently developing a genetic test which can be used by doctors worldwide, which we hope will pick up the common causes of nystagmus at a young age through a single test.
as we accept patients from the whole of the south of the UK and beyond, many of our patients ask what will happen when they come to Southampton.
Most patients will come to clinic and see a number of different faces and have a number of different tests using different kit and technology depending on how old they are and how able they are to perform the tests. We now also involve parents and siblings, and recently we've established a protocol where parents and siblings will have a number of the tests that the child with nystagmus has in addition. Because we have found that in so many cases family members have features in their eyes which help us with diagnosis, we now do a number of investigations on family members when they come to clinic as well. Once all of this has been done, the family and the child will sit with one of us doctors and we'll have a long appointment discussing all the findings and the potential implications. In some cases, further tests will be needed further down the line, but in most we're able to get all the tests done at a single long appointment. We achieve this using a lot of stickers and a lot of lollies.
We then work with the patient's local eye doctors to plan their future care. As we are a regional referral centre, we also teach other doctors how to manage nystagmus.
We also train the next generation of eye researchers in the form of PhD students and clinical researchers.
In summary, we are working as fast as we can to answer these questions in order to help our patients with nystagmus. We would like to thank ANN for all the support that they have provided us for this.
Goodbye from Southampton.
Leaving Southampton, it is just a short sprint to Wales in the UK and Cardiff University, where we find our next research group.
Hello to all of you attending this weekend's American Nystagmus Network meeting, and greetings from us, the members of the Research Unit for Nystagmus, RUN, here at Cardiff University in the capital city of Wales.
Please allow me to interrupt Professor Erickson and introduce the rest of the Research Unit on Nystagmus. Starting at the left is Dr. Fergal Ennis from Ireland. Next to him is Asma Binti Ahmad Zahidi, a postgraduate research student from Malaysia, followed by Nikita Thomas, another postgraduate research student from Wales. At the center is Professor Erickson, the leader of the research group. Next to him is Onyx Rasp, a postgraduate research student from Germany, followed by Dr. Flores of Vinuela Navarro from Spain, and finally Dr. Lee Baclareevy from Northern Ireland. Not present, but still part of the research unit on nystagmus at Cardiff, are Dr. Matt Dunn, Dr. Tony Redmond, and Dr. Maggie Woodhouse.
Some of us were fortunate enough to attend your last meeting in New Orleans, but are unable to do so again this year. For nearly 15 years, we at RUN have been carrying out research on infantile nystagmus. Although our long-term goal is to better understand the mechanisms that result in the development of continuous eye oscillations in early infancy, we have more recently been focused on investigating the impact of the eye movements on vision. In the course of our studies, we have discovered that surprisingly, visual acuity, which is your ability to see fine detail, is largely unaffected by changes in the intensity of eye movements in a given person. Our other findings include the fact that the brain mechanisms underlying a number of eye movement systems, such as making eye movements while reading, which we call saccades, or tracking a moving target, which is called pursuit, are quite normal in those with nystagmus. In fact, even their sensitivity to motion is indistinguishable from those without the condition. An important point that we would like to emphasize is that our research would simply not be possible without the generous financial support of a number of charities in the UK, including Nystagmus Network, InVision, or Infantile Nystagmus Vision, and Fight for Sight. We're also deeply indebted to our Cardiff cohort of over 100 volunteers with nystagmus who give up their time to participate in our studies. All of us here wish you the very best and hope that you enjoy your time together in Minneapolis. Goodbye from Cardiff.
So now, let us leave the UK and continue west back to the US and land in Akron, Ohio. We will now hear from Dr. Richard Hertle from the Akron Children's Hospital. I had originally asked each group to provide a video no more than 10 minutes in length. However, Dr. Hertle, being Dr. Hertle, provided a video closer to 20 minutes. So, enjoy.
Hello, friends and family at the 2017 American Nystagmus Network meeting. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you this year. I'll miss seeing all of you, but I know that you'll have an excellent conference. Joe, hi, and everybody, hi. They asked me to talk for a few minutes about something that I might have said had I come to the meeting this year. So I wanted to do this brief 15-minute, maybe 20-minute discussion on something that I hear a lot from the patients who visit me. A lot about what's happened to them when they see their ophthalmologist locally. So the purpose of this 15-minute talk is, what should I expect from my eye care professional if I bring my child in with nystagmus? And these are the things that I think that in 2017 my colleagues should be aware of, whether they agree or disagree with it. Being aware of the knowledge that's out there will help you help your child, or help yourself. So that's what we're going to talk about. The first thing is naming these problems. And if your ophthalmologist is still calling this congenital nystagmus and not calling it some form of infantile nystagmus, then that's erroneous. Children are not born with this condition. It develops in the first few months of life. This classification system was agreed upon by a group of national and international scientists. And so I think the terminology of nystagmus is very important. And there are actually at least 11 major types with multiple subtypes of nystagmus. And this type of terminology, with the three most common in infancy, 9, 10, and 11, being present. So this kind of communication, my child has nystagmus, which type is it? Is it infantile nystagmus? Is it fusion maldevelopment nystagmus? Is it spasmus nutans? Is it nystagmus associated with vestibular disease in the brain or brainstem? It's important that the eye care professional understand which type of nystagmus it is. And the diagnosis of this is based on clinical examination and special testing. There are a few peculiarities of the examination technique that most of my colleagues should be aware of. When examining children with nystagmus, their visual system should be measured with both eyes open, because when one eye is covered in a child with nystagmus, it changes the nystagmus intensity, changing vision. The vision can be measured multiple times, even in an office visit, allowing the child to use their best head posture so that the best visual acuity can be made. The visual acuity also needs to be measured using a standard protocol. In preverbal children, either a matching protocol or some type of block letters like the Leah symbols or the HRTV, which is what we use. The last thing is, I believe that all children should have special testing, including electrophysiological testing, including eye movement recordings, and some of the others, which I'll show you on the next slide. Eye movement recording, unfortunately, is not available and probably will not be available as routine diagnostic aids by most ophthalmologists or optometrists for the foreseeable future. Although it can be, it's not that much of an added expense, and it can be acquired information. But what this does is it diagnoses the type of nystagmus. It helps immensely with the diagnosis of the nystagmus and also the characteristics that may or may not be treated. Those of you who've been to my office have seen how simple it can be done with the video recording seen down on the right with the star. Nothing just touches the patient. The patient sits 1.5 meters away from the screen, and a video recorder records the eye movements, which are then interpreted. So my sense is the hard part about eye movement recordings is not doing them, it's interpreting them. And until the docs start doing them and learning how to interpret them, it won't be done. This is not routinely incorporated or required as any part of education, either on the ophthalmic side or the optometric side. Other testing needs to be routinely done and can be routinely done. And this includes testing of the input system to the eye, the afferent system. These include things like contrast sensitivity testing. There are multiple forms that you can do this. Optical coherence tomography, which is checking the retina and optic nerve structure. Behavioral testing of visual and vision function in little babies, as well as electroretinography and visually evoked potentials. These all tell us how well the retina and optic nerve are functioning, or how their structure is and how they're contributing to the overall visual function of the patient. So you can see all of the, in addition to our routine examination, the eye movement recording as well as special afferent system testing allows us to make a decision. This was allowed me to learn about this disease, not just doing an exam in the office. The abnormalities that can be detected as a result of combining all these testing are seen here. The things that are wrong with the visual system of patients like yourselves or your family members are listed on the top here. And these are the eyes not working well together, the retina and optic nerve not functioning, lazy eye or amblyopia, the need for glasses, and the inability to use the lens system in the eye for close vision. Subjectively, these are the things you have told me over the years. You can't see, you don't see color well, contrast is not good, there's decreased reading, decreased motion, pursuit, which is tracking. The visual fields can be changed. How fast you see the world is changed, depending upon where your eye is in the orbit or to the sides. These are all of the things that are wrong with your visual system, not just black letters on a white screen. If all that is measured are black letters on a white screen, that may not improve if you make the eye movement system better. For instance, a child with only just strabismus and the eyes are crossed, and a surgeon operates to straighten the eyes. They don't use vision as a measure of the success of straightening the eyes. They say the eyes were crossed 10 degrees before surgery, I did surgery, and now they're crossed 1 degree. That's the measure. They don't check vision before and after to see if vision got better. When we do surgery particularly for just the nystagmus, we measure the nystagmus before and measure the nystagmus after. Acuity or letter acuity is not necessarily related directly to the nystagmus itself. These other things are how fast you see the world, how you see the world to the side, how things are perceived in motion. The treatment for the visual system, and these are treatments for all the visual systems of all patients with nystagmus, include medical treatments, optical treatments, and surgical treatments. And medical treatments include oral and topical medications, which have been shown in multiple studies to help the nystagmus. Things like visual training and non-traditional therapies like acupuncture, biofeedback, and meditation have been used to improve the nystagmus. Other optical treatments include prisms and computer-assisted instructions, microscopes, telescopes, and specifically contact lenses, which provide 4 advantages in patients with nystagmus. They improve the quality of the image because the optics is better. They allow children to use a head posture and not have to look through the side of their glasses or over their glasses. You can tint them and help with light sensitivity as well as pain, as well as light interference, which is like looking at this presentation with all the lights on in the room. And they also will help slow the nystagmus. Certain types of contacts in certain patients will actually reduce the intensity of the nystagmus itself. Botulinum toxin has been used in some forms of nystagmus, not necessarily in infantile, not successfully over the long term, but certain forms of acquired nystagmus are very amenable to repeated Botox injections to get rid of the shaking of the world. These are examples of the types of nystagmus that are associated with improvements using medications and which ones they are. And the 3 that you see here, 3 or 4, baclofen is used really well in periodic alternating as well as upbeat. And periodic alternating or changing intensity nystagmus spontaneously is present on top of infantile nystagmus in about 1/3 to 20% of patients. 3,4-diaminopyridine or Empira is good for acquired downbeat nystagmus, and Namenda is really good for acquired pendular nystagmus, especially associated with multiple sclerosis. Surgery for nystagmus now has a long history. This is the surgical operations that I use when we feel that surgery is indicated in a patient for nystagmus. One of these 9 operation types, and these are laid out in multiple formats, multiple publications, presentations, as well as in a textbook. So any surgeon can look at a patient and fit the patient in one of these algorithms and perform the operation because they already have the surgical skills. The surgeons, the ophthalmologists that you see have these surgical skills, and using them to treat nystagmus patients is for them, the cutting and sewing is not the hard part. It's making the decision to do the surgery for a nystagmus patient using this algorithm. And these are the algorithms that I use, and many of you have had done yourselves. Using black letters on a white screen, as I talked about before, is not the best way to measure the effect of nystagmus surgery. Having said that, I can hardly publish anything without getting visual acuity involved, so I do it, and I think it's important for patients. It's certainly important when you want to do your driving test, because driving is limited by this letter acuity. But overall, in thousands of patients, I can tell you that if you have surgery for infantile nystagmus, 75% of patients will get 1 to 3 lines better. Best binocular acuity, 15% get more than 3 lines. So there are many patients will improve their letter acuity. Every patient that we've done this on, the nystagmus gets better. How that affects each individual patient is different depending upon the associated other eye diseases they have, as well as their age. What is fundamentally important and improves in almost every patient with infantile nystagmus after treatment, it's medical, optical, or surgical, is that position where you move the eyes, where you see better. What we used to think happened is if you looked to the left and saw better to the left, you'd have to hold your head to the right. And then after treatment, that area where you saw well would move centrally. But what actually happens is it moves centrally and broadens. And this breadth and depth of the nystagmus null zone increasing is really directly related to improvement in vision function. This is how we measured this. We have the person look to the sides, back and forth, and now we have multiple publications of this showing how that you can see to the side much more with your best vision than have your vision degrade. Those of us who don't have nystagmus can look to the sides, up or down, and the world looks the same. This is not true in patients with infantile nystagmus. So these are the things that improve after eye muscle surgery for patients with infantile nystagmus. Black letter vision, contrast sensitivity, the ability to use detect motion, the size of the visual field, how well you get around in space, how fast you see the world, as well as the visual quality of life. These are measures we've studied before and after surgery. So in conclusion, I think it's important that your eye care professionals, if they want to help care for you and not give you there's nothing that can be done, they either find someone who understands some of this or will learn some of this. They're up for a fire alarm. So the take-home point, many of you have heard this before, or even can find me saying the same things over and over again, is that what I would expect as a patient or a family from my eye care professional is two things. Either they try to find out what the best treatments are and implement them for you or your child, or find someone who does know them. I think that in 2017, I can strongly say that the idea of there's nothing we can do for you is over. And that's really my message. If you're seeing an eye care professional who's telling you your child has nystagmus and there's nothing we can do, then it's important to find someone who will work with you to understand these evaluations and treatments, or work with you to find someone who does. And again, good luck to you in your conference. I'm sorry I'm not with you this time, but I'm sure I'll see you all again.
Finally, leaving Ohio, we travel back to our starting point in Minneapolis, completing our one lap of the globe of nystagmus research. I hope you found this small snapshot of nystagmus research interesting and informative, and I hope to see you at a future American Nystagmus Network Conference.